Hey everybody, this is Professor Norwood, and I just wanted to quickly, cover some things about argument as you all are working on your draft. All right. That draft is due by the end of next week, but I designed it that way so you could have some time over the break to, break. But if you need a couple days into the break, to get your draft together, try to get it in, before the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, at the absolute latest. So yeah, just take your time and make sure, your final project is the best you can make it. All right. And these slides can, be found on D2L in the drafting arguments module. But again, I just wanted to go over some basics about argumentation. All right. So things you need for an argument. All right. You need a claim, right? You've already done that on your proposals. And those have been returned to your assignment folder with a little bit of feedback. But for the most part, the feedback was saying, continue your research and get started on your draft. But just make sure that you are making a claim, not stating a fact. There are a couple, just for example, like if you want to argue that social media has a negative effect on mental health, that's cool, but that itself is not the argument. All right. The argument is what should be done about it. Why? Because social media's impact to mental health has already been pretty well documented. So you don't need to make that argument. The argument should be what should be done about it. Should we police ourselves better? Should there be, some kind of warning, on social media? So think about like if that's your topic, think about like how you should address the issue instead of um just stating that it is, an issue. So you definitely need a claim, right? You also need reasons, right? Why should your audience accept this claim? Okay. Whatever your claim is, right? Just imagine your reader saying, well, why? After you present your claim. Just, to use the example I just said, there should be, a Surgeon General's warning, on social media, right? So your reader's going to be saying, well, why? Okay. Those are your reasons. And really your reasons are how you develop your paper. So try to imagine, each one of these points as, a different section of your paper or a different idea that you can address in one, maybe several paragraphs. Don't think that you have to address your reasons like one reason per paragraph. It may take you, several paragraphs to develop one reason or to explain one reason. So don't think that you have to jam everything into one paragraph. All right. And then finally, once you've presented your reasons, okay, as one of your reasons, you say, well, there should be a certain Surgeon General's warning on social media because it has a negative effect on adolescents' body image, right? That's a reason. Okay. Now, with your evidence, show the reader how that's true. Point to a study, that shows the effect of, maybe Instagram on, teenagers and adolescents' body image. So claim reasons evidence. That's going to be the foundation of your argument. All right. Any successful argument needs all of the above, but there's still one more thing you need. Okay. A response to opposing viewpoints. So you got your claim, right? What's the idea you want your audience to accept? You got your reasons. Well, here's why you should accept it. And then you got your evidence. Well, here's the evidence that supports my reasons, but that's not enough, right? Because inevitably, there are people, critics, whomever that are going to oppose you, right? There are opposing viewpoints that you will need to address. And just, logically, it makes sense to address opposing viewpoints because it shows your reader that you understand like the depth of your issue and you've investigated, just different perspectives before you settled on, the one that you're representing in your paper. So certainly acknowledge opposing viewpoints. However, do not misrepresent them, do not mock them, do not cherry pick them. Cherry picking means just, taking bits and pieces of your opponent's argument and kind of reforming it to make it look weaker. All right. Don't do that. Represent the argument, as it is. Step up to the challenge of, responding. All right. And when you misrepresent, when you mock, when you cherry pick, that makes your position, that weakens your position. That tells your audience that you have not done the work to generate, an opposing viewpoint, that has some merit to it. So don't misrepresent your opponent's views. All right, really address them, and then offer a response. Right, maybe there's some research that your opposing viewpoint didn't incorporate. Maybe it's based on like some outdated premise. Maybe it's based on some kind of fallacy, but show your reader how that opposing viewpoint may be misguided, and then also there's no law against to conceding that your opponent may have some good points. You just don't agree with them wholesale. All right, for example, if you're writing a paper arguing in favor of free college tuition, right? You could agree, that it's a great idea in principle, but you may have some disagreements in, some of the proposals for applying it, that have existed so far. All right. So even if you don't, disagree wholeheartedly, you still want to offer some opposing viewpoint. All right. But concessions are fine. You can concede, that the opponent makes your opposing viewpoints make some good points. You just may disagree with parts of, the opposing viewpoint. All right. Okay. Now you're sitting in front of that blank screen, right? This is often the most stressful part of writing, just getting started. How are you going to start? Right? How are you going to get your paper started? Well, the first thing you're going to do, of course, is put your MLA heading up there, right? Name, instructor name, class and date, last name, page number to the right. You're going to make sure you're double spaced. You're going to have your title. Title doesn't need any bold print, italics, or any of that. All right, just keep it, 12 point times New Roman like the rest of your paper. So you did all that, right? Now it's time to begin. Okay. Think about how you're going to get your reader's attention. Don't start off with some generic opening. People go to college every day. People use social media all the time. All right. Don't begin like that because you've already lost your reader when you start like that because they're like, ah, yeah, another one of these, or okay, people definitely use social media every day. Tell me something I don't know. All right. So think of a way that you can get their attention, right? Maybe there's an interesting statistic, a statistic that seems so unbelievable that your reader's gonna want to read more. All right. Maybe you begin with some, interesting quote. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, once said, all right. Maybe you start with an anecdote. Anecdote is like a relevant but very short story. All right, not about you, because again, we're not incorporating our own experiences into this draft. But maybe there's a story on the news. Maybe there's a current event, you can discuss that's relevant to your topic. But maybe a series of questions is a good way to begin. But just think of how you can begin your paper without, telling them something they already know, or starting with some generic opening that's been used a million trillion times. All right. So yeah, think of a unique way to begin your paper because it matters. How you start your paper kind of sets the tone, for the thing or for the whole thing. All right. And then, after your hook, ask yourself, what does my reader need to know? Okay. What gaps of information do I have to fill in? What historical background, what contextual background do I have to provide? All right. Now, this is going to be brief as, you may continue, giving some background in the body of your essay. All right. So you definitely don't want to overwhelm your reader in your introduction. But take your introduction literally. You're just introducing ideas, right? So there's no need to go into some extensive history or background in your introduction. But again, just give them some kind of like when you go out for a meal, right? This will be the appetizer. All right. And the main element of your introduction is your thesis statement. All right. Just full disclosure about me when I evaluate papers. Of course, I read the whole thing. But the first thing I read in any essay is the thesis statement. Thesis statement gives me a good idea of how the paper is going to turn out. If the thesis statement is clear, specific, it's debatable. Usually that's going to lead to a good paper. However, if the thesis statement is kind of nebulous or kind of vague, then the paper is usually going to go that way. If the thesis statement is a statement of fact, the paper is probably just going to be an informational paper that doesn't take a real position. But if it's something contestable, then the paper's being set up for an argument. All right. So make sure your thesis statement, is specific, right? Make sure it's debatable, and then make sure it's provable. And the logic behind presenting it at the end of your introduction is that your introduction builds up to your thesis statement. So you do start with a hook. And then after your hook, you provide some background, right? And that kind of segues into your thesis statement. Okay. And here is all that in action. Okay. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, in-state tuition and fees for national public universities has increased 296% over the past 20 years. Okay. So that figure 296%, that's pretty eye-catching, right? And that's you want to have something that affects your reader. Okay. Then here's a little bit of context, right? There was once a time when college was a realistic option for most people in the US. If one had the aptitude and desire, a college education could be theirs for a relatively cheap price. In fact, a great deal of public universities didn't even charge for classes, as many were driven by the idea that a well-educated society is a better society. Additionally, even if one did not decide to go to college, meaningful employment was readily available. Nowadays, however, the high cost of higher education makes many raise the question, is college really worth it? Okay. Now it's starting to transition into what the argument will be. Many college students will be thousands of dollars in debt by the time they graduate. To help end overwhelming student debt, the government should set a cap on college tuition. That is the argument. Okay. That's the claim. The government should set a cap on college tuition. All right. We hooked them in with a statistic. We gave them a little bit of background on, college education and maybe the necessity of it and how the cost has increased, consistently over the years. And then we hit them with our argument. All right. And we got out of there. We're ready to start our first body paragraph. And then check out the length of this introduction, right? It's not excessively long, but it's also not so short that it's underdeveloped. All right. And if you're thinking, visually, um, for your introduction, right, when you have your MLA heading, your title and everything, your introduction probably shouldn't, cross the halfway mark, of the page itself. That's if you're thinking about it visually. Like if your introduction is your entire first page, or it comes down to almost the end of your first page, scale it back a little. Some of that could probably go into the body of your essay. So think of your introduction, hook, background, thesis. All right. Now you're ready for the body. Okay. That's where you present your reasons. Okay. Why should your claim be supported? Why should your audience support your claim? Okay. Then you present your evidence. Okay. Evidence supports your reasons. Okay. Then you have your topic sentences. Be sure that each body paragraph starts with the topic sentence that states the main idea. That is going to keep your paragraphs organized. Meaning, if you say, increase college tuition, causes people to graduate with debt, that prevents upward mobility. That's all you're going to talk about in that paragraph. How debt prevents upward mobility, or debt from, college tuition, prevents upward mobility. That's all you're going to talk about. And if you state that in your topic sentence, then that is going to help you orient your paragraph. It's also going to like prepare your reader for, what's to come, within that paragraph. So use topic sentences to guide your paragraphs. Also, when you're writing a topic sentence, make sure you're making a point, meaning, um, increased college tuition leads to increased debt that can prevent upward mobility. All right. Good topic sentence. Don't say one aspect of, increased tuition that's not talked about is, and then you go into a point. Don't say what is or what isn't talked about, because at the end of the day, we don't know. It might not be talked about, or it might not be something that's, in our algorithm. All right. Make sure your paragraphs are unified. What does a unified paragraph mean? This is old Comp 1 stuff, but a unified paragraph means you address one idea per paragraph. Meaning, if your topic sentence is talking about the connection between student debt and upward mobility, that's all you're going to talk about in that paragraph, right? New idea, new paragraph. Okay. And then development just means that you're fleshing out your idea. Okay. A good strategy for building paragraphs is PIE, P-I-E. All right. Point, information, explanation. Points, the topic sentence. Information is you fleshing out that idea that you have in your topic sentence. Also, information could be some bit of research. You bring in some study, you reference some anecdotal evidence, right? Some statistic you bring in. And then explanation is your follow-up, okay? Your own commentary. Don't start or end body paragraphs with quotes. All right. Or even pointing to some research, right? Start with the topic sentence that states the main idea, and then end with some of your own commentary. Whenever you have a quote, whenever you have some research, always follow it up with your own commentary. Research is meant to support your points, not to make them. Okay, you make the points, but you use your research to support them. All right. And what do you know? Here is a body paragraph. Okay. Starts with the topic sentence. College is supposed to be the key to a better life. However, many graduates find themselves saddled with debt that can affect the quality of their lives. Okay. So the essence of this paragraph is how debt from college tuition can affect, the quality of a student's life well beyond graduation. Okay. That's the topic sentence. Okay. Here's some development. As previously stated, college tuition has risen drastically over the last 2 decades. As a result, more students are taking out loans to pay for their education, with the consequence being increased debt upon graduation. Okay. Here's some research. A Gallup poll, credible source, that surveyed 30,000 graduates in 50 states revealed that about 70% of graduates are in debt, with 21% owing between 25 and $50,000. All right. Let me just stop right here because 30,000 graduates in 50 states, that's a pretty broad cross section. So that can be pretty revelatory. All right. The study also notes that graduates in debt are, quote, less likely to enjoy their work and less financially and physically fit than their counterparts who graduated without debt. Oh, that speaks to quality of life. So that supports my topic sentence. That supports one of my reasons. Okay. Now, all right. If we want to take it a step further, we can include a different type of evidence to give us some emotional appeal. All right. What I said when I said don't rely on your own experiences, that's true, but there's no law against you, mentioning someone else's experiences. All right. To show that, the statistic shows that this is a problem that kind of goes across the board, but mentioning a person with this experience, it makes it real, and then it adds some emotional appeal. One can witness the real-time effect and the panic that can ensue by looking at the case of Kyle McCarthy. A recent graduate working odd jobs to repay $72,000 in student loan debt. In an interview with CNBC, McCarthy laments being on the brink of eviction and worried that collectors may target his already financially strapped mother. To sum up his despair at the whole ordeal, McCarthy laments, I can't get out, you know? A very short quote, but also a very telling quote. And then follow up with your own commentary. McCarthy is one of many with overwhelming debt preventing upward mobility. Okay. So try to bring your reader full circle, in the body of your essay. Topic sentence, relevant supporting details, point information explanation, however you want to frame it. Just be sure that you're organizing your paragraphs with a topic sentence. And then also make sure that the dominant voice in each of your body paragraphs is your own voice. Okay. Don't overquote in a paragraph. Yeah, just make sure you're adding your own commentary to your body paragraphs, and that really should be like the bulk, of the paragraph itself. Okay, and then here's your appeals, right, and your rhetorical analyses essays. Okay, that I will be returning to you soon. I'm fully aware that I'm I'm a little behind on grading, so just please bear with me and thank you for your patience. It's looking like I will be working, over most of the break just to get myself caught up, but that was kind of an aside, to this whole thing. But going back to your rhetorical analyses, your job in that assignment was to identify, ethos, pathos, logos. Now your job as, oops, saw a typo. Now your job as writers, is to establish your own credibility, right? Include some of your own appeals to emotion, right? And you definitely want to have an appeal to logic. That's your reasoning and your research. Okay, I will address this typo by the time you guys see these slides. All right. So make yourself credible by using credible resources, acknowledging opposing views, and proofreading carefully. That last part is of vital importance because you can present a great argument, but if your paper has typos in it, then there's just little nicks, at your credibility. All right, because your reader's going to be thinking, well, if they didn't take the time to proofread, then why am I going to trust anything they say? All right, it's the same with using credible sources. Okay, try starting with an academic library. That's going to be your strongest resource. The reason being, the material in academic libraries has already been peer reviewed and vetted for credibility. All right. And then also just a quick note about credible sources. Biased sources do exist. All right. Definitely biased sources certainly exist. But also be careful about labeling a source as biased because sometimes it's our own biases that makes us interpret sources as biased. Meaning if we encounter a source that kind of goes against our personal worldview, there can be a tendency to label that source as biased when it's not really biased, it's just in disagreement, with a view that you have. So just be sure before you label something biased that it actually is biased and that you have checked your own biases. And you're not, like I said, just filtering something through the lens of your own biases. All right. So make sure you are using credible sources and that you have your own biases in check. Okay. And then acknowledge opposing viewpoints. It's like, yeah, there's other viewpoints, but here's why you should accept mine. All right. And then, throw in some appeal to emotion, but be very careful not to rely on it because a critical thinking reader is going to see through that. Meaning, okay, cool, you're pulling my heartstrings, you're telling me all this emotional stuff. Great. But where's the receipts? Meaning, show me how this is true. All right. Now, if you have some emotional appeal, like in addition to your logical appeal, that's going to give you like a balanced argument. Okay. And then logic, that's going to be like your primary appeal in this assignment because you need sound reasoning and good research. Okay. So support your pints with it. All right. Now, I will address this typo. All right. Teachers are not infallible, contrary to popular belief. All right. Now, okay, how are you going to respond to opposing views? It's one thing to acknowledge them, okay? Um, but it's another thing to offer a rebuttal. All right. And I try to get students, especially my in-person students, to imagine themselves presenting this paper. And with every presentation, there's always a question and answer session at the end. So try to anticipate, what questions your audience will have, and then try to answer them, within your paper. And then also, if you're thinking logistically, right, think about where you're going to do this in your paper. Okay. Are you going to lead by dispelling some myths and responding to opposing views? Or, are you going to, tuck it into the back of your paper and, spend the majority of your paper, making your claim before you address opposing viewpoints? Both of those strategies can work. All right. It just depends on, how you want your paper to unfold. Okay. So try anticipating your readers' concerns as you write your draft. Acknowledge and respond to opposing views. So let's say, right, you're writing this, this paper about tuition caps, and you say, well, some critics may argue that it is not the government's job to regulate tuition costs. Okay. Another typo. Come on, Norwood. All right. Your response will be, a tuition cap will be a collaborative effort that encourages input from colleges. Several countries, including Germany and Finland, have agreements between colleges and the government to keep costs minimal. Okay. And then you can keep going and flesh that out. All right. So, yeah, think about how you're going to respond. Okay. In your paper, just as with your proposal, you don't need to respond to every, opposing view. Um, but what are the main ones? Okay. What are the main ones? All right. Yeah, two should do it. Or unless there's like one glaring one, that you're really gonna spend time dismantling. All right. Don't mock by saying, yeah, some critics may argue that it's not the government job to regulate tuition costs, but those critics are just stupid. Or, they just got it wrong. Right? Well, it kind of speaks for itself, that they're wrong. Don't do that. Okay. Respond with some research, or respond with some sound reasoning. All right. And then, how are you going to get out of there, man? Okay. Don't just tack on your conclusion because you know you need one, right? Also, don't incorporate any new material into your conclusion. Don't make any new points in your conclusion. If you do, then it just becomes a body paragraph, right? So think about how you can make a strong final impression on your reader. Okay. What do you want to leave them with? Right? Closure. Okay. Maybe point to the future. All right. You can go with the tried and true method of just summarizing your paper. All right. But definitely don't have an underdeveloped conclusion. And then, as I just said, don't present any new material in your conclusion. Okay. And then here is a conclusion. Due to the change in the job market, a college degree is virtually a necessity. In fact, some even argue that the master's degree is the new bachelor's. While the quality education is important, it should enhance a person's life, not become the source of economic distress or cost so much that it prevents capable high school students from thinking that college is even a viable option. As prices continue to increase, it's worrying to think about a future when only a select few will be able to afford college. However, if the problem of inflated tuition isn't addressed in a meaningful way, this could be the impending reality that we will face as a country. Okay. I know I slipped up a little bit and used first person. You can just say that the United States will face whatever. All right. But yeah, think about, how you can finish up strong. All right. Um, Revision, is going to be your greatest asset, in this essay. Just as an instructor, I'm a big believer in process, and I think that the real writing, happens, when you're revising. But Um, with this first draft, I think the main push here is, getting your ideas out on paper. All right. And then finally, folks, just a note about artificial intelligence. AI, can be a great tool for brainstorming. You can even ask it, about your topic. If you use ChatGPT, you can ask it like, "Hey, what are some good reasons, that there should be a cap on tuition?" That is fine. I'm 100% okay with that. All right. What I'm not okay with is, taking that material, pasting it into your own essay, reworking it, so it sounds like you, but it's really, an idea you got. Well, no, not an idea, but words and phrases you got from ChatGPT. Um, so if you use it, you ask it a question like, "Hey, can you give me some reasons tuition should be lower, whatever." All right, fine. Take those reasons, and now your work starts. Go do the research, right? Don't just leave it at that. Even ChatGPT will tell you, like, some of this can be inaccurate. So it's your job to keep doing that legwork. And then also, when it comes to Grammarly, when it comes to Copilot, or when it comes to these AI assistants, they can be useful for spell checking, like dotting your I's and crossing your T's. However, don't take its suggestions when it says, hey, let me improve your writing by, smoothing it out a little bit. Always stick with your original wording because that is going to increase your AI score on Turnitin. All right. So AI, it's a tool like any other tool, but don't let it do your thinking for you. All right. It still has yet to surpass your brain, in terms of like critical reasoning. And then also, if you're taking those suggestions of how to quote unquote improve your writing, from like Grammarly or Copilot or one of these other things, you lose your own voice. And just as an instructor, I get a lot of generic sounding writing where the student has lost their own voice. Why? Because some of me wants to say there's like the burden of perfection, right? I have to sound perfect when no piece of writing is perfect, and I would much rather your paper to sound like you. Okay? So don't rely on like artificial intelligence to do your thinking for you. Use it as a tool just like any other tool in your toolbox. All right? So get busy on your drafts, my good people. All right? Do your best. This assignment is weighted the heaviest, out of all that we've done throughout the semester. So really try to put your best effort into this thing. Okay? Have a great week.